Greetings, I am George Mulei in Nairobi, welcoming our viewers in Kenya and around the globe. Here we shall tackle issues, global ones, which affect us at home and relate to us as well. More so, these issues and how they affect the people who are supposed to be the movers and shakers in our country. You and I, the youth. And on to our news. The National Investigative Agency recently has released 22-year-old photojournalist Kenyan Youth after illegally detaining him on charges of stone pelting and secessionary activities against the state of India. Media watchdogs could say the charges could be fabricated. US President Donald Trump has presented another name as the US ambassador to Kenya. His name is Republican member of Senate of Illinois, Kylie McCarter. The politician has known to have initiated various projects over the past 30 years with his wife, Victoria. The March of Our Lives campaign has gained worldwide attention as the youth in the states have taken initiative to protest and demand for gun reforms in Congress. As of March 24th, there have been reportedly 17 mass shootings which have led to student deaths and injuries. The March of Our Lives campaign has proven that the youth do have a social responsibility to actually stand up for lives and matters that affect them in terms of policy making. In 2012, a hip-hop group named Yenama managed to stage a revolution that managed to remove the incumbent president at that time, Abdoulaye Wade, out of power. Thus the question, are the youth aware of the power that they hold? Are the youth ready to break out from the cocoons of the previous generation, school, or their parents? Do the youth actually take a stand or take chances against any matters that affect them unfairly, or are they aware of their constitutional rights when it comes to matters affecting them in policy making? Here is our correspondent Fardosa Hussein with a feature to talk about the same issue.
Revolutions throughout history have been known to be achieved by the energy of the youth. From Yenama in Senegal to the current March of Our Lives in America, the young are standing up and having a voice in policies and matters affecting them. In Kenya, however, things may be different.
When you see a youth leader who has his or her own supporters, and then the old people have their own supporters, these old people have the finances to actually finance goons to fight this other, the minority, the youth ones. So it's, no matter how far you go, how high, how low, left, right, these people will always beat us down.
I think it will just get to a point where the Kenyan youth, they'll just learn that the power is in their hands and they decide enough is enough, that they're going to take a bigger step. But until then, tuendelee tu kutumia keyboards.
Thank you, Fardosa Hussein. So, what do you think about youth participation in policy making and specifically politics?
Thanks, George. My opinion on whether youth in Kenya are currently participating in politics is yes, as per now, because of the problems we've been facing. There have been numerous problems that the youth right now are facing: unemployment, poverty, and a lot of other things that come as a result of those two things. My opinion is, well, before, youth are not participating in politics because of this whole stereotype thing that if you're not 40, you're not suitable to join politics, you're not suitable to talk about politics or policy or governance in Kenya. But right now, a lot of youth have taken time to read the Constitution, to understand the Constitution, to understand the fact that they have a right to participate in public forums, to talk about things that matter to them. And that's why currently youth are participating in politics. But before, youth were, well, not into politics that much because, again, it was influenced by that stereotype. So, yeah.
Thank you, Fardosa. That was our correspondent talking about youth participation in matters in policy making and in politics. On to our social media platforms. Our question was, do the youth know what next after leaving the cocoons of their parents' homes, schools, and older generation? Felix says, how do you expect youth to thrive when we are not given the opportunity to work and even prove ourselves? Mike Mburu says, on the other hand, youth should stop blaming people for their problems and start thinking solutions-wise. It's within our means to do so. And on our show, we have a couple of guests whom we are thankful for sparing us their time. We have Arnold Bazenge, who's the SecGen of Daystar University. We have Abubakar, who's a freelance journalist and also a fourth-year student doing electronic media. And Nixon, who's a radio presenter. So, Bazenge, let's start with you. What do you think about the current situation when it comes to youth participating in policy-making activities and politics?
Thank you a lot. We need first of all to understand the history of our country. We need first of all to understand where we are, and we need to, the youth of this country need to understand this. We need to know what is going around us, because we are so ignorant, and therefore the other people use that advantage and mislead our country. The moment you're knowledgeable, the moment you know the law, the moment you know what is required, and I can tell you for sure, and you believe in your supreme God, and I can tell you for sure the youth of this country can do much. But as long as they avoid it and they say that does not concern them, then we will have a problem. They must be acquainted, they must be serious in understanding what is going on in this country. They must, everything, whether it's a law, whether it is something that are being launched in this country, they need to be aware of it. Because it's unfortunate that the current constitution in Kenya was not really voiced by the young people, but the older generation. And that's why we are seeing all this fracas everywhere. Because it is us who need to be on the forefront, and not only on the forefront, but even in making sure implementation of what we are asking for or what we are advocating for.
Abubakar, what do you think about what Bazenge has said concerning youth participation in politics? Is it true that it's 50-50?
Thank you so much, George. The youth for a very long time have been very passive when it comes to politics, partly because they don't clearly understand their role in politics, and secondly because of a view by the wider community and in reference to the Kenyan community that they are viewed to be in an age bracket which is largely associated with carefree things, meaning they cannot or could not be trusted with positions that are synonymous with power. If you look at the Kenyan parliament, the average age will be more than 35, which is out of the youth age bracket. Understanding that the constitution allows one to vie at the age of 21, and the entries in terms of the number of people who have vied for these positions, it therefore leaves up to you to do the maths and calculate that out of the number of youth who have vied politically, many of them were not elected. Primarily, one will assume therefore that it is because of their age. So I think the youth are becoming inactive because of the constant frustration in terms of not being elected to office, and also partly because on their side as well, they're engaged in lots of things that may not be, as to use, and for the lack of a better word, sassy or sexy. So I think they're not engaged because of those reasons.
Excuse me. Nixon, what do you think about what Abubakar has said, that there is the previous generation who are still holding on to power? Is it true that it may prevent the youth from taking in the reins from the previous generation?
Thank you, George. To be honest, I think the issue about the youth's participation in the country's politics, the only way it can be realized is when the youth themselves come into leadership positions. Because unless that happens, all the other things that people come and do is just, basically it's just talking. When I see my fellow youths going to the TV panels, and start talking about, you know, Kenya needs this, Kenya needs that, all of that will be exhausted, of course, at the end of the show, and it will be just that. It will disappear into thin air, and during the next debate, something else different will come. But when they are in the leadership positions in government, something concrete can be done. I mean, it can be put into law. The opinions can be put into law when they are at the helm of government.
Thank you, Nixon. That is quite an interesting point. Thank you, Arnold. Thank you, Abubakar. Thank you, Nixon, for your time.
Thank you.
And on to more of our social media platforms. We have more comments coming right in. Abu Iraqi says we need opportunities for growth. We don't get that. Meanwhile, the previous generation is busy saying how millennials are lazy and yet they have all the opportunities. And speaking of opportunities, isn't it a coincidence that in almost every industry in the country, that the people who are holding the reins of power, or should I call them gatekeepers, are people from the baby boomer generation? Food for thought. There is no doubt and there is no humane or way to say that the issue of gun violence against the youth in the States was inhumane. There is no sugarcoating towards it, that there is no way, there is nothing one can say about a young man waking up and going to school and killing his classmates, people he's known for years. But then again, the youth, especially the youth, should also remember that they are not immune to the laws of karma, that what goes around comes around. We have heard and we have seen on social media, on various Western media, how the issue of bullying has become so rampant in the West that it reaches a point whereby someone has no other source to go but to retaliate. And when they retaliate, it's too late to address the issue. So what is the issue? Despite that the youth are aiming for gun reforms, have they actually looked themselves in the mirror and addressed the real issue? Why do they bully and victimize these people who actually result to the taking up of arms and killing their fellow students? What are their moral values? Us as youth, that is something that we do not know and we do not identify as a generation holistically. What unites us? What makes us stand together? What makes us disagree in terms of policies, in terms of moral standards? And that is something that I think we do not fail to address. When do we look ourselves in the mirror and actually say that enough is enough? What unites us? Just as in the States that they are known to be land of the free and home of the brave. What unites them? Policies were not made as a result of people who are smarter than everyone else. They were made as a result of moral standards and principles that united them, that some people believed that were worth dying for. And that is the same that should be done also in our country. That is the same thing that the youth in Kenya should also address. We may complain about injustices that face us, but what is really the question we should ask ourselves? What do we stand for? What are we willing to die for? From there, I think, is when we can move positively to change in this nation, not in terms of the knowledge that we know. That is actually a complementary, but not a supplementary. So I ask you, my fellow youth, what are you willing to stand for? What are you willing to die for? What unites you? What makes you cringe? Only in terms of moral principles and what you are willing to stand for.